Hey guys, this is Ernesto and welcome back to yet another video. Today we're going to be doing a video on high-speed sync. So I have James here, Dr. James. He hates when I call him doctor, but he deserves that title. He basically went to school a long hours and years, right? Years.
About 8 years.
8 years. So he deserved that title. So James is an awesome photographer as well, and he's very knowledgeable when it comes to, you know, these camera technologies that's out there and all these different lights. So I figure, who else would I get to talk about high-speed sync other than James? So we want to focus on high-speed sync, like I said, but I think in order to speak about high-speed sync, we need to focus on all the other technologies that's out there, like Hypersync, Hypersync, and obviously talking about the sync speed on the cameras as well. So with that said, we're going to jump into this video right away.
So when you have your Canon, whether it's a GH3 or a Canon 5D Mark III or Sony a7 II, they're engineered with their focal plane shutters to meet up with a certain sync speed of any modern day flash, and that allows the camera's curtain to travel across the sensor since they use the focal plane shutter and expose that sensor properly.
So would you say most cameras come with like a 1/200th of a second or like 3/20th of a second? That's usually where their sync speeds are?
There's a few cameras that have a slower sync speed. Some are 1/125th. A lot of older film cameras like the Pentax K1000, I think that syncs at 1/125th.
Okay. And if you push it, if you're shooting with flash and the flash doesn't have high-speed sync and you exceed that sync limit, what tends to happen and why does it happen? Like if I push my camera, I shoot with a 5D Mark III. If I push my camera beyond 1/200th of a second and my flash doesn't have high-speed sync, what tends to happen there?
So what'll happen is when you say, accidentally you're shooting at 1/250th, you'll have a black line. It'll be like a black bar either on the top or the bottom of your frame. And that's the portion of the frame that the flash could not sync with your shutter, and the shutter actually just went right by it before the exposure was over.
I heard a lot of people talk about leaf shutters, like if you're using like a medium format camera, and if it has like a leaf shutter, and leaf shutters is usually built into the lens, like if you have a leaf shutter, you could push it to like, you know, 1/1600th of a second and you still be able to sync it up with your flash. So why is he able to do that with a leaf shutter and you can't do that with a standard DSLR shutter?
So with a DSLR shutter, most of them use focal plane shutters, what we talked about, the curtains. So let's say that this imaginary square is your sensor. And so you'll have a curtain. The first one's going to come up and it's going to be followed immediately by that second curtain. So they're going to travel like this across your sensor, and what's happening is during that flash sync, the exposed portion in between is where all the light from the flash is hitting.
Okay, so when the flash goes off and that second curtain is coming, and the light is still exposed, if the light's fire, it's just like, you know, if I hold my hand up right now on my face and the light is shining on my face, the lower part of my face will be in shadow because my hand is blocking it. That's what's happening with the shutter. So when you have like the leaf shutter, which kind of opens up like a, you know, like a flower or something, I guess that's the right analogy, like a flower or something like that. Why is it that when that opens up like that, as opposed to when that shutter is going up and down, that you don't have like a black bar or a circle on your image?
So if you think about your hand kind of like this, think about it think about the lens as kind of like a tunnel. Inside that tunnel, there's kind of like an aperture type device.
Okay.
And so that's what your shutter is. That's that leaf that you're talking about. It opens up like a flower. So when you hit your shutter, that is actually, instead of curtains following one another, this is just a circle that opens. Okay. And lets that light pass through and hit the film or the sensor or whatever is behind it. That's going to record that image for you.
So it records that quick burst of light, hits the sensor, and then it closes, as opposed to having a second curtain following and causing a shadow to happen there. Okay, so guys, that's a quick synopsis of what the sync speed does and why it's so important when it comes to utilizing flash. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is high-speed sync and why that is important and how that works. All right, guys, so now let's talk about why do we need high-speed sync and what's the benefits of high-speed sync. So James, what's some of the benefits of high-speed sync and Hypersync and all these other technologies that's out there?
So first of all, you can shoot with a larger aperture, like f2.8 if you want. It'll allow you to exceed that sync speed we talked about earlier.
Okay.
And it gives you more control over the light in your scene if you want to bring down the background to maybe darken out some benches in the park, or maybe a passerby, or if you just don't want clutter in the scene.
Okay.
That way the light is focused on your subject, and when they look at your image, all they see is what you want to see rather than everything that's lit by the ambient light.
Okay, so guys, this is important in the sense that if you guys don't understand like the exposure triangle, which is what James is alluding to here, there's three things that you definitely focus on with respect to the exposure triangle. There's the aperture, your shutter, and your ISO. So with respect to the shutter, which is what we are talking about here, your shutter really helps control the ambient light in your image. So if you wanted to control the background, you basically would want to exceed that sync speed, pushing your shutter to a higher, to 1/300 or 1/8000 of a second, which is probably not recommended, but you could push your shutter that far to help bring down the exposure, the ambient light exposure down. And what that does is basically allow you to also utilize what James was talking about, which was the aperture, basically be able to have a larger aperture to be able to create that, depth and dimension in your image. So one of the things that people use today is like to help with, create that whole depth and dimension by utilizing a larger aperture is they would use like what do you call those things that you put on your camera?
The neutral density filters?
Yeah, so before high-speed sync, I guess, was out there and people couldn't afford whatever, the larger lights that's out there, they used to utilize, and they still utilize it today, I guess, the neutral density filter, where you put it on your lens to help bring down that light in the image, and then you'll be able to use a larger aperture. So those are some of the benefits of utilizing high-speed sync, so you don't have to come up with these these little tricks like putting stuff on your camera to help bring down that light. Now, if you're a video shooter, unfortunately, you still have to utilize, the neutral density filter on your lens to help bring down that light. Like, for example, now we are utilizing a neutral density filter basically to help bring down that light on this exposure. So those were the quick highlights of why you will want to utilize high-speed sync with your images. All right, guys, so now let's jump into the meat of this tutorial, which is high-speed sync, talking about how that works and when you use it, why you want to use it. So James, so tell us a little bit, educate me and educate these guys a little bit about the high-speed sync technology.
So to answer your question, what high-speed sync is, it's essentially kind of like what we talked about. It overcomes the issue with focal plane shutters. Leaf shutters don't have this issue because they open up and expose the sensor all at once.
Okay.
But with the focal plane shutter, it has those curtains that follow each other across that sensor. So to overcome issues with sync speed technology, they introduce high-speed sync, and there's two forms. There's the Hypersync we talked about that Electron uses, and then there's a pulse high-speed sync that Nikon, Canon, Profoto, and a few others use. And it actually is a pulse of light that exposes your subject, and it does that as the two shutters follow across the sensor.
Okay. So for hyperspeed sync, like, who came out with that technology? Like, why did they come out with that technology?
Well, Nikon pioneered it, and Canon, they followed suit because of competition. And today we have what we have with our speed lights, that pretty much all of them, except for a few cheaper budget ones, do high-speed sync now.
So what are the, if you're using speed lights, what are some of the cons of utilizing hyperspeed sync with speed lights?
So the biggest con and issues that I had, and we're going to talk about in a minute while I switch products, with speed lights is they have to reduce the amount of output they put out as far as flash power to actually pulse that light fast enough to follow the focal plane shutter across the sensor.
Okay, and as they pushing out that light, the pulsing light, that power that gets decreased, does it create some kind of a proximity issue with respect
and that's
to?
the biggest issue, is you have to bring your light modifier, your light, or whatever you're using over your flash to modify that light closer to your subject to get the same exposure.
So let's say if I wanted to, right now we have this nice sunny day here, so if I wanted to utilize a speed light to overpower the sun, would you say what I would need, like what, about 5 speed lights I would need utilize to help overpower that sun?
You could probably get away with, depending on what model you're going with, you could probably get away with just 3. But 5 would definitely do the trick. You could do maybe 3 on your main light modifier and maybe 1 as a rim if you need it.
Okay. So the product that you utilize, how did it help address some of the issues that you have with Hyperspeed Sync?
So the company I went with was Perphoto, and they made the Perphoto B1. I think it's been about 2.5 years since they introduced that product. And so their thought on the subject was, we can make a mono light that's battery powered that does high speed sync, but instead of having the issue of your light output decreasing, they flipped that model. So when you enable high speed sync with the Perphoto B1, it actually uses its pulse in its higher power range, so that way it attempts to overcome the proximity issue that you have with normal high-speed sync and speed lights.
So basically you could have your light further away from your subjects if you want to include more of the environment. I would say probably that type of the light you would want to use to help you know, create some. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So what are some other cons of utilizing the B1s? Like if I was indoors trying to utilize the B1s, utilizing Hypersync, not that you probably wouldn't need to utilize Hypersync if you're indoors, but if you wanted to, what would be like some of the cons because of that pulsing that you were talking about?
So the biggest issue that I found with the product is it's an excellent product, but because it does use its pulse and high-speed sync at the higher end of its range, if you're indoors, most of the time you don't really need to shoot a really large aperture with all that light it's going to output. And so most of the time you'll just get an image that's a little too dark or overexposed, depending on how you're trying to balance the ambient light.
Got it. Okay, so that's Hyperspeed Sync in a nutshell. And look, so with respect to Hyperspeed Sync, the way I generally use it would be if we're outdoors to help, you know, get the ambient light under control and basically get a higher aperture so I could get that shallow depth of field. So that's what I would utilize the Hyperspeed Sync for. Utilizing it indoors, probably I would never utilize it indoors because there's really no reason to utilize it indoors. And even if you're outdoors and you want to utilize Hyperspeed Sync, if you're in a shaded area, you probably don't need to use it. The only time I would use it, again, like I said, if I wanted to get like overpower that sun, that's where I would use this Hyperspeed Sync. So I hope this little crash course was a little bit helpful for you guys. So we're going to talk about some of the other technology really quick, like Hypersync and Hypersync. They're very similar, but we'll talk about it a little bit. All right, guys, so now let's talk about Hypersync and Hypersync. They're very similar with respect to the technology. It's just like 2 different companies utilize them, I believe. So James, give us a little bit more information about what Hypersync is and Hypersync, and you know, why would you utilize one above the other?
So first of all, Hypersync was a technology that came about by Pocket Wizard in their attempt to work with studio strobes before all this high-speed sync technology was available, to exceed the sequencing of the camera, to give the photographer a little bit more control over their light in the scene. And Hypersync is used by Electron. That's their technology. It works almost exactly the same as Hypersync, and their thought was the same.
So they don't emit the pulse like we were talking about before. They don't emit the pulse like Hyperspeed Sync. They just emit one burst of light. So that burst of light, when does it come? Does it come when the shutter opens or before the shutter?
It comes just before the shutter opens to give the flash enough time to get enough power to last for the entire time the focal plane shutter goes across the sensor.
So does it work better on a slower flash duration or faster?
It will work better with strobes that have a slower flash duration.
Okay, so all right guys, so that's it. That's all I have to say, or all we have to say with respect to Hyperspeed Sync. I felt like we couldn't talk about Hyperspeed Sync without talking about all these different types of technologies and techniques that's out there, because you just have to understand where it came from and why you want to use it and why you shouldn't use it in certain cases. So I hope this general discussion was helpful to you guys. So now we're going to jump into some actual photo shoot utilizing Hyperspeed Sync to show you guys how that works with the Perphoto B1s. All right, guys, so here we are with we're gonna do a quick demonstration of high-speed sync with or without high-speed sync. So this is Ashley. You guys probably seen Ashley a lot already in multiple videos. Ashley is our model for today. So I'm gonna show you guys how those shots come out and why you would want to utilize hyper speed sync in this situation. So we have Ashley here. Ashley is gonna be backlit by the sun, right? So we're gonna be battling that exposure challenge. So let me show you guys some of those shots and how it comes out. All right, so that shot basically at 1/8,000 of a second, ISO 100, and my f-stop is at 2.8. Go ahead and run your hands through your hair. One, two, three. She's eating here.